Welcome to episode 2 of the Wragg suspension project. So we're going to get straight into it, and I've got to remove the rear under tray so I can basically get at the rear axle details. So let's get to it. The rear under tray is held on by quite a lot of 3/16 BSF screws. So all you have to do is go around the rear section and undo all of the screws, and normally just leave a couple in the back so the thing doesn't sort of start hanging down. And then what I do is I sit underneath the thing with both knees, take out the last 2 screws, and I can let it drop down carefully. You still have to jack the car up though, because you've got to slide the thing out from the side slots. Right, so now that the rear under tray is off, I'm going to disconnect the axle from the leaf spring. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the weight of the car on the leaf spring, or take the weight of the axle just as the wheel lifts off, and then I'm going to screw this in here, and I'm going to pull out this pin, draw this pin out, and that will disconnect the leaf spring from the axle. Then I'm going to lower the spring back down, and I'm going to lower it to its new ride height, which is going to be about 2 inches. So I'm going to have to get blocks of wood and work out roughly where that's going to be. I'm going to have to adjust it, but the idea is that I leave the axle and the springs all in situ, but just disconnect it. And obviously I need to chock all the wheels so nothing moves backwards and forwards. And then when I've done that, I can start measuring up this distance to work out what my drop link is going to be like. And when I get to that, I'll explain what I mean by drop link and how it has to connect to the radius rod. So I'm all teed up to do the operation. I've put a Jenga tower of blocks just underneath where the spring will be, and I have jacked up the spring, taken the weight of the car on the spring, just so the wheel's lifting off. And now what I'm going to do is screw this slide hammer into this pin here and attempt to knock it out. Here it comes, out it pops. That's handy. So now, wasn't expecting that to be so easy. Now if I lower the spring down, I should find that the car drops out from there. And that is exactly what I was expecting to happen. It's dropped out a bit further than I thought. Actually no, it's about right. So this is basically going to be where the drop link goes, between that and that, and I'm going to have the radius arm connected in that pivot point there. So that was step number 1, which went remarkably well. So now I need to repeat that for the other side, and when I've done that, I can start to mock up the actual radius rod for the top bit. Right, so now the springs and chassis have been lowered from the axle on both sides, and it's starting to look like the ride height's going to be at pretty much the chassis is pretty much parallel with the floor, which is quite good. So the way it's going to work is that this bracket, which I made earlier in true Blue Peter style, is going to mount on there like that. I made this earlier as well. It's got a hole in the end, and this is going to be connected to a length of tube like this, quite thick gauge steel tube, and that's going to run from there all the way to this point here. At the other end, I'm going to have this spherical joint, and the spherical joint is going to be located in the original axle location, just there, if we can see that. But it's going to be mounted in this bracket. Now it won't be made out of cardboard, it'll be made out of steel, and it'll be much stronger than this. It'll be mounted in there like that, and this lower part of the bracket will then connect down onto the spring. So now the axle is located by this rod, but the spring is obviously still connected to it, which provides the springiness, the suspension element. And this is no longer being the radius arm. So it's a much more secure location, and also it lowers the ride height as well. Ride height. But what I can see already is that this bracket here is going to fail with this brake back plate, which is made out of quite a thick casting. So before I can make any progress, I've basically got to take off the wheel the hub, the brake drum and the back plate and the whole lot, so that I can start to prototype and mock up what it's going to look like. So once I've taken all this off, I can then make a more substantial bracket, probably out of aluminium as a first prototype, because it's quite quick and easy to make. And I can make up a threaded boss for that. I can tack it into the end of the tube. I can put it into the end of there, and I can start to see how it's all going to work. So yeah, next step is take the wheel off, and take the wheel, the drum, the brake, the whole hub off, and expose that bit there. So the first thing we need to do is jack the wheel up, and then take the wheel off. It's only held on with 3 nuts, so that's very simple. Sometimes the inside of the wheel hub binds on the drum, so it takes a bit of a knocking, so it did on this occasion. Now I'm re-supporting the axle so that it's the same level as it was before. First thing to do is to take off the hub nut, which is quite a big BSF nut, and now I need to take off the drum. The drum's held on with 3 slotted, I think they're 1/4 inch BSF screws, countersunk. Again, that sometimes takes a bit of knocking off, so I'm using a piece of wood to knock that off. Now I can use a puller, and I can pull off 1/2 of the hub. The inside of the hub is held on, the bearing is held on by a big nut, so I'm just flattening the tab, and now I can undo the nut, take that off. When that's back on, I can reattach the other outside of the hub, and then I can reattach the puller, and I can pull off the whole hub and bearing assembly. Comes off pretty easily. This is the bit that's on a spline. That's not on a spline, on a tapered shaft. Just connected the brakes here. So the plan now is to take off the whole back plate and brake assembly all in one go. This is held on by 4 5/16 BSF nuts and bolts through onto the axle. It all comes off quite easily. Right, so now that the back plate is removed, we can see a little bit more what's going on. So I've cut this tube in half and machined it down very slightly to fit inside that joint there. If I lay that on there, and you can see this cardboard thing is going to basically go in there like that, and we're going to have a rose joint on the end of there. So I think the next step now is to make fit that to here, and in order to do that I'm going to have to make some shims so that it clamps the top of the spring down nicely. I'm going to have to make a shim inside there so that this clamps the spring down to the chassis. So stick that in there, and also I'm going to machine up an insert for the end, so I can actually put a threaded section in the end for the rose joint or spherical bearing. So when I've done that, then I can start to think about making a prototype one of these. So I think next step is sort that out and sort that out. So things are starting to now take shape, and I've made a few more bits. So we've now got a spacer in there, which we need so that when we clamp this bracket down, it clamps it to the bottom of the chassis, and this doesn't get in the way. Also, this little spacer which goes in there, also equally needed. They're both 6mm, so that will go on there like that. I have, unfortunately, I've got no 22mm bar, so I've made up this aluminium part just so I can mock it up. So I'll make this out of steel, and that'll be threaded. It's not at the moment. This is just so I can sort of put it all in situ and see how it's working, and I can actually progress to make the bracket on the back. I've got this bit of cores that I already had, so all I need to do now is to assemble that. So it's now all been assembled, and it's starting to look how I want it to look, which is pretty much like that, which is the works car. And we can see that down the far end the arm is located in the axle, smack bang in the middle. So the next thing to make is going to be the rear drop link, which is going to have to be fairly substantial because it's taking the entire side load of the car, so it's going to be quite a meaty thing. But I'm going to make that in the next episode. So that is all for now. Hope you found the journey interesting so far, and I'll keep you posted.